I'm now pleased to introduce our next inspiring speaker, Melissa Farrell, who I could refer to as President Farrell, because Melissa, as many of you know, is the president of St. Joseph's Hospital here in Hamilton. She comes to that position with a wealth of experience in government and also could not have predicted that she would be at the helm of the St. Joseph's Hospital, navigating through the pandemic and all of the challenges it must have posed to her. So, Melissa, extremely excited to have you join us today and hear your inspiring leadership journey. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I had a few slides. I hope that's all right, that I was thinking that I would go through with everybody today. Feeling a little unworthy, to be honest with you. That was just really inspiring from your sister. So amazing to see the minister speak about her experiences. Just wanted to highlight what I'm supposed to be highlighting here, my disclosure in terms of the fact that I'm part of the faculty, and then also I have relationships specifically with the Hospital Association, and then of course our research board at St. Joe's. I wanted to start a little bit just talking about my own career path in particular, and really start with the fact that I actually have my master's in urban and regional planning, not in healthcare. I did kind of focus when I was doing that master on healthcare related planning, and really started my career in particular working at something that used to be called a district health council, specifically in Kingston, the Southeastern District Health Council, where they predominantly provided modeling services, planning services, health planning services in particular, for regions, which then eventually evolved into local health integration networks, where they also became the funders. So both the planning and the funding kind of came together, but before they were separate groups. So if anyone, often I get asked that question when people find out that I have my master's in planning, they think, well, what's the connection with healthcare? And that connection really comes back to the planning that was done on healthcare service planning, in particular through those district health councils. I then moved on from that district health council, moved to Toronto and worked at University Health Network. And I saw Rebecca Ripa is here. So worked at UHN in the corporate planning department there. And then probably the most significant thing that ever happened to my career in particular was when the government was launching the wait times strategy 15 years ago, or over 15 years ago now. I was recruited in to work for the government on that strategy in particular, and worked directly with Dr. Alan Hudson, who used to be the CEO of University Health Network, in helping with the implementation of that strategy. And I honestly ended up in government and stayed there for, really 15 years until I came to St. Joe's as the president here. All kinds of different diverse roles, all in the Ministry of Health in particular, but ran wait times, primary care. There was an implementation branch, and then became the assistant deputy minister for quality and funding. And then before I left, hospital, and which was everything related to hospitals through the ministry, and emergency services before coming here. I do just want to say, because I appreciate, this is a diverse group that we're talking to, my roles in the government were incredible. And I would just say, if anyone is ever thinking about working for the government, it is really an amazing career opportunity. And I stayed in the Ministry of Health. But once you get into government, you can move around anywhere within government. And so the opportunities really become endless. For me, I just was very passionate about healthcare and ended up sticking with that specifically. I have other stuff on this slide. I think, an important point to be flagging for everybody is that throughout that career, of course, like so many others, got married, had babies. I have two, a son and a daughter, who are very important to me. So obviously those balance questions that Minister Anand was talking about, I've experienced those myself, and I'll talk about a few of those too as we move forward. And I, of course, love the outdoors, which was part of what I put on there. And the thing that, I do to decompress is read. I read at least 3 books a week, and I feel like I've been kicking that up even further with COVID. Now that sounds very impressive, but a lot of those books end up being cheesy romance novels because they're easy to get through and you don't have to think a lot. So anyway, that's one point that I wanted to raise. So I came to St. Joe's. I can talk to you about what that experience was like. I mean, for me, when I went into the interview for the role, I just thought, I'm just going to go in and I'm going to try, assuming that they wouldn't even think of me, given the fact that my experiences were so government focused. So I really came in just saying, listen, if you're looking for someone who has deep clinical knowledge, I'm probably not your person. But I feel like that's not what you need. What the organization actually needs is someone who can think strategically, not saying that individuals' deep clinical knowledge can't, but someone who comes with the strategy background, understands how government works, understands how all the funding formula works. I think I have something to offer here. And I guess they took me up on it, which is, incredible. It's been an amazing 2 years, and my 2-year anniversary was actually yesterday. So pretty fabulous. I put this slide together, had some support with that, but put this slide together just to say, in that first year that I was here, we launched our strategic plan in October 2019, big vision about where we wanted to take the organization. And then of course the pandemic hit last March. And what I have added just on this slide was, and it's just a point that I just want to be making sure that I really raise for anyone who's looking for some advice, is the continuous learning opportunity for me has always been a huge part of my own career objective. And I'm always trying to learn and always trying to contribute. And so even during the pandemic, now that I look back at it, I can't even believe I did it, but I put myself forward to be part of the Ontario Hospital Association board, which happened this past summer in 2020. So this is my first year on the board. And then also put myself forward for an academic appointment. And I thought that was really important, not only because I feel so strongly that McMaster is such an incredible organization, but it's actually more connected to the fact that the two organizations, I don't think I had realized coming from government into an academic hospital, how closely the hospital and the university are intertwined. I mean, you hear it when you're not here, but it is very, very real. And I felt like I owe this to the university and also the hospital to be a part of that community as much as being a part of that hospital community. So just wanted to say, through the pandemic, those are two big things from a career perspective that I was pushing forward at the same time. I did just want to say a little bit about what it's been like leading through the pandemic, in particular at a hospital who's been, heavily hit by the pandemic in many ways. Certainly our community has been heavily hit by the pandemic, and trying to support that community as much as we can with redeploying our own staff out to long-term care homes, or what we're dealing with right now in terms of critical care and increasing our bed capacity so significantly. There's just, 1,000 different examples of the ways in which we have been involved in the pandemic and trying to support individuals with COVID, whether it's testing and assessment, et cetera, et cetera. For me, it was really important that we as an organization came out to the organization and clarified what our organizational priorities would be during the pandemic. And that started by just acknowledging the fact that we would be putting our staff and physicians and the volunteers and our learners, their safety would be our number one priority. Also ensuring, of course, that we have high quality and accessible services that we're providing to the community. That's of course very important too. Making sure that we're maintaining open lines of communication and transparency. So we completely redesigned how exactly we're communicating to the front lines and to physicians, and really throughout the whole organization with, town hall, very, very frequent town halls and other things, COVID updates that we're providing almost on a daily basis. And then of course, providing appropriate financial stewardship. That would be, critically important throughout this time when it has been completely impossible to understand how exactly the finances related to COVID related care were going to play out. But we just put our hands up and signed ourselves up to do a whole bunch of things, and figured we would figure out the financing later because we knew the community really needed us. And then of course, absolutely essential, especially for an organization like St. Joe's, which is very, very mission oriented, to just keep the mission front and center. That's again why we would be signing on to do things without actually having all the details associated with it, and then keeping the values really close at hand throughout the pandemic too. So that's, what became important for me anyway, but it became certainly important to the entire executive team that this is how we were guiding the organization over the last year. I wanted to just end off, my part of this talk with some advice. And I appreciate there's so many people around this table where, like, I love getting advice from you. You're mentors to me. But for those who may be looking for just some perspective from me in particular, in terms of what advice I would give women who are looking to get into leadership roles or who are already in leadership roles and trying to think about where to go next, these are a few of the things that I would just say. The first is you got to know yourself. Like for me, I know that, there's so many jobs that you can do in the world, but I always wanted to be doing meaningful work. It had to be meaningful, and that's the North Star. And so, working in a hospital, I feel like I'm able to give back and contribute to an organization. I actually feel very similar to how Minister Anand was just talking about that. It's values based. My husband works for Nestle. I don't have an issue with Nestle. He makes chocolate, but I don't think I could make chocolate. Healthcare for me is my vocation, and I feel very passionate about it, and that just is really important to me from a career perspective. The other thing that I think is just really important to be telling women and it would be the same for men too, but I think it's very, very important for women because there's always this conversation, and anyone I've ever mentored throughout my entire career about the compromise. Like, are you making compromises in your career and for me and with your family? And I would just say that I have had to make those compromises having young kids. And often I like to describe it that I really try hard to make sure that I have quality time with those kids. It may not necessarily be the quantity of time that others may end up getting with their children, but for me, I'm getting the career that I love and also getting really meaningful time with the kids. And I'm constantly trying to balance that to make sure that I'm giving them the best that I possibly can. I also just wanted to give the advice that I think it's really important to be thinking about your career, not necessarily the roles necessarily, but what brings you joy and the passion at your work and kind of aiming for that specifically. I also think it's really important to, the next point is another one that I would give anybody who ever asks me for advice is take the temporary leadership gigs, the temporary leadership jobs that often get offered to people. People will debate them like, oh, well, it's not exactly the kind of leadership job that I want. Or maybe this timing isn't necessarily perfect, but it actually gets your toe into leadership. And often one job ends up almost always usually leading to other leadership opportunities. And I think that's certainly been my own career experience. And I know that that's lots of others too. Having mentorship, like mentors, so critical. I also think, as I was mentioning on the last slide, it's really important to be investing in that continuous learning and developing and growing. I've had these incredible leadership coaches throughout my career. I've taken amazing leadership courses, some of them that have been directed through work, but often I've asked for the opportunities to be able to take these courses at Rotman or Ivy or at Harvard, for example. Training, reading, really taking the opportunities that can bring you new skill sets and experiences. That's at least certainly how I've managed my own career. And then I think just the last point that I think is always really important to talk to anyone about when they're thinking about their careers, you just have to know your own limits. And if you don't know your own limits, having people in your life that actually remind you. And for me, that is often my husband. And we usually, every so often have those check-ins about where are we at in life and where are we at in terms of the workload that often, he's helping balance out in terms of our kids in particular. So I have no idea, if this is hitting the mark for other people, but this is certainly the advice that I would give others if they're asking for that kind of advice in terms of trying to get into those leadership roles. Sometimes you just have to take the opportunities as they present themselves and really know yourself. And it is worth spending the time really thinking about your career. And you can make compromises. You can do it all, but you do have to make compromises. I think that's just reality. So I think that's really important. And I thought what I could do in terms of ending was just showing you where I am right now, because, I'm hiding in my basement because my children are at home. Like I'm in an unfinished basement at the moment, hiding from the kids. So, I often hear people say, oh, how do you do it? And how can you manage it? And I'm managing it just like you are managing it. We all manage it the best way we possibly can. So I just wanted to make sure that I shared that with everybody too.